how does chronic stress affect the nervous system? And then how does the nervous system affect everything else? It's a good question. And that is what we're talking about today on Thinking Thursday. So what happens to your nervous system when you're under chronic stress? A lot of things happen, and it's really important to understand exactly what's going on in your nervous system because your nervous system affects everything else. So let's dive in. First and foremost, the nervous system is so complex, so incredibly complex, with trillions, literally trillions of nerves throughout the body. So the anatomy of the nervous system is the brain, the spinal cord, and then the nerves. The central nervous system is two things, the brain and the spinal cord. The central nervous system is essentially the body's main command center, okay? It is responsible for processing sensory information, integrating data, generating motor commands to control thoughts, movements, sensations, and really all bodily functions. It receives signals from the peripheral nervous system, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, and then it processes the signals and coordinates the responses within the brain, and includes three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and then the brainstem. The spinal cord is the pathway that carries all these signals between the brain and the rest of the body. Now, you also have the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is made up of the nerves, the rest of the body, all the other nerves that are everywhere else in the rest of the body that aren't the brain or the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system works in tandem with the central nervous system. So the PNS, peripheral nervous system, sends signals to the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system determines, what do those signals mean? How am I going to respond to those? Figures everything out, and then sends the response back to the peripheral nervous system. So in this video, the red is the electrical impulse. It's the signal. It is what the nerve is telling the brain. Then the brain thinks about it, processes it, decides what to do, and then sends the signal back down. That is a very basic understanding of what is going on here. Now, the peripheral nervous system is broken down into two more parts. The somatic nervous system controls the body's voluntary actions, things like walking and talking and moving your limbs, picking things up. Anything that you are conscious of is what the somatic nervous system is responsible for or controls. Any conscious action is handled specifically by the somatic nervous system via sensory neurons that send signals from the body to the brainstem and the spinal cord, and then back to the skeletal muscles to perform the action. This is sort of what the somatic nervous system looks like when we break it down a little bit more. The cranial nerves, which are in the head and face, those nerves control all of the muscles in your face. Whereas all of the nerves that go down the spinal cord, those control all of the rest of the muscles. Now, we have the somatic nervous system, and we also have the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls the body's involuntary actions like breathing, digestion, heart rate, etc. The things that you have no conscious control over. Any subconscious action is handled by the autonomic nervous system via sensory neurons that send signals from the skin and the muscles, right? Sensory. They send those signals to the central nervous system up in the brain and the spinal cord. And all of that processing happens and then sends the response, if you will, back to the muscles to perform the action that you do not have control over. The autonomic nervous system has a more complex neuron communication system. So you have different types of neurons that handle different things. that you, again, do not have control over, like smooth muscle. Smooth muscle are the muscles that line certain organs, like your intestines, your bladder. You've got cardiac muscle, which is the heart muscle that you have no control over. Glandular tissue, you have lots of glands in the body. And adipocytes, which are fat cells. These are things that the autonomic nervous system handle. Now, again, when you have the cranial nerves are handling everything that is involuntary in your face and your head, then on the back end, the spinal side, you have the same system doing the same type of thing, but going through the spinal cord. Now, you have the autonomic nervous system, which has two parts, technically three, but we'll get to that in a minute. You have your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is known as the fight or flight system. It activates the body for action during stress or danger by mobilizing energy. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for increasing heart rate, blood pressure, alertness, slowing digestion, opening airways. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. It's known as the rest and digest system. It calms the body by conserving energy. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for decreasing heart rate, stimulating digestion, lowering respiration, and so on. So essentially, these two systems are opposites. So let's take a look here. In the sympathetic nervous system, it dilates pupils. In the parasympathetic nervous system, it constricts pupils. The sympathetic nervous system inhibits saliva production, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system stimulates saliva production. The sympathetic nervous system opens the airways, right, to help get more air into those lungs when you're in a stressful situation, if you need to run. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system constricts airways. And when I say constrict, I don't mean it's like squeezing. It's just that it's not as essential in rest and digest to get lots of airflow because you're not running from anything. Now, when it comes to the heart, the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate, and the parasympathetic nervous system decreases heart rate. The sympathetic nervous system inhibits stomach activity, and the parasympathetic nervous system stimulates stomach activity. The sympathetic nervous system inhibits intestinal activity, right? Intestinal activity, we're talking about moving your bowels, pooping, for example. During fight or flight, your digestive system says, hey, we're not going to poop right now, hold it in. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system during rest and digest says, oh, okay, we can do our job. The sympathetic nervous system relaxes the bladder, and the parasympathetic nervous system contracts the bladder. That makes sense if you think about a stressful situation and you think about wetting yourself. There you go, right? Your bladder has just completely relaxed and let go of anything that was in there. There is a lot more in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. This is just an example of some of the functions. Now, which nerves control each of these? So the sympathetic nervous system, all of its functions are in basically the middle of the spine. All of the nerves that handle the sympathetic nervous system functions are between about T1 and T12, although that goes a little bit above and a little bit below. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system, really different. All of its functions are either in the cranium or the sacrum. None of the nerves really in the rest of the spine do anything for the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, there's one more part of the nervous system that I want to talk about, and that is the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is the second brain. That is what is often called. It is fascinating because it independently controls digestive processes like motility, secretion, blood flow. It is made up of plexuses in the gut wall, which contain both sensory and motor neurons. The enteric nervous system can and does function independently. It does take some information from the autonomic nervous system to do certain functions. So in this picture here, we're looking at the brain, the vagus nerve, which is really important, and the gut. The fascinating function of the enteric nervous system is the way that the gut and the brain communicate. So the gut sends information to the brain because there are receptors that are in the gut that detect things like food, chemicals, microbes, etc. And they send sensory signals to the central nervous system via the vagus nerve. From the vagus nerve, the signals reach the brainstem and then proceed on to the amygdala, hippocampus, and the hypothalamus, affecting mood, stress, memory, etc. On the flip side, you've got the brain to gut, motor output. Stress, emotions, and mental changes can trigger physical gut symptoms like nausea, butterflies, and more via the vagus nerve. So the brain sends motor signals back down the vagus nerve to control digestive processes, hormone release, and inflammation. So the enteric nervous system is its own system, but like the parasympathetic and sympathetic, it's part of the autonomic nervous system because you do not have control over it. The thing is, the three work together. They balance each other. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems usually have opposing effects, but they are always working to balance each other out. The enteric nervous system manages digestion, but the sympathetic nervous system can inhibit it during stress in particular, and the parasympathetic nervous system can enhance it during rest. So together, these three systems within the autonomic nervous system ensure automatic bodily functions maintain internal stability, also known as homeostasis. Now, this is just an overview to understand how complex the nervous system is. Next up, we're going to talk about chronic stress and what it does to the nervous system.